Mom, you're welcome to come live with us. But we'll need about $350 a month from you for living expenses, Susan said, putting it plainly at the kitchen table. You know, that's still much less than you'd pay to rent anywhere else around here. On the surface, the words sounded practical, even generous, but hearing them stung. Evelyn Parker's pride in a place she hadn't known could ache. Evelyn, 74 years old. Once a trusted sales associate at a fabric shop in a quiet Chicago neighborhood, simply went quiet. She didn't ask any questions, and she didn't meet Susan's eyes. That night, after dinner, Evelyn made a quiet trip on foot to the local credit union ATM, the same one she'd used for years. She closed her savings account with hardly a word exchanged at the window. Then, the next morning, tucked her coat around herself and walked with resolute steps into the office of a real estate agent who specialized in independent senior living apartments just outside the city. This is the story of Evelyn Parker, a good, solid Midwest name for a woman who spent her life giving, her care, her time, her skill. She'd worked her hands rough over bolts of cloth, always explaining the stories behind the prints, always using a calm, steady voice. She was the kind of woman people trusted with their weddings and funeral attire, a fixture at church bazaars and town festivals. At 60, Evelyn lost her husband, Richard. He was a woodworker by trade, the quiet sort. One of those men whose hands could fix nearly anything, and whose love for his family shone through the little things. A bowl turned on the lathe, a shelf hung straight. When Richard passed, he left her with just enough, between life insurance and savings, about $21,000. Not enough for extravagance, but enough for Evelyn to plan to live her later years quietly and with dignity. But then, in the winter of 2023, everything changed. One icy January day, Evelyn slipped in her bathroom and cracked a rib. Thankfully, she didn't break a hip or do worse. Still, that tumble forced her to look squarely at what it meant to live alone at her age. The hospital stay wasn't long, but it reminded her how quickly the world can tip from under your feet. Her daughter Susan, living out in the Connecticut suburbs, came to visit while she was laid up. The girls hadn't seen each other in months. Susan sat on her hospital bed holding her hand and said, "Mom, you should move here. Live with us for a while. The kids would be thrilled, and honestly, it'd take a load off me too." For the first time in a long while, Evelyn's heart swelled a bit. She thought, maybe, at last, I'll be surrounded by family again. I might even get to see the grandkids every day. Holding that warm hope close, she packed up her modest Chicago apartment and made the move east to Connecticut. But what awaited her wasn't the homecoming she'd imagined. The guest room Susan ushered her into was really the old storage room in their split-level ranch, a cramped, drafty space, just big enough for a futon on the floor, with peeling wallpaper and only a sliver of sunlight peeking through a narrow window. "It's cozy," Susan said, trying to sound upbeat. "Old-fashioned, like growing up in the country." There was no bed, no dresser, just a folded pile of Evelyn's clothes set down on the faded carpet. It quickly became clear that, in Susan's busy household, there was an unspoken expectation. Evelyn would spend her days in the kitchen, prepping breakfast, tidying up, folding laundry, making dinner, keeping an eye on the grandkids. No one ever directly asked her to do these things. They just fell to her, as if it was the natural order of things. And at the end of each day, after 3 home-cooked meals and a spotless house, no one remembered to say, "Thank you." One gray afternoon, as Evelyn sat folding towels, her youngest grandson looked up at her with big eyes and asked, "Grandma, do you work here?" The question startled her. She nearly laughed, but the truth of it pricked somewhere deep. Evelyn had come here as a mother, hoping to finally play the role of grandmother. Yet now, it seemed, she had quietly become the unpaid housekeeper. Susan's life was a rush of work calls and errands. Conversation with her mother was brief and functional. Even time with the grandchildren felt formal, cordial, not comfortable. One rainy evening, Evelyn came home with a heavy bag of groceries. She stood in the entryway for a moment, the porch light glowing behind her, and asked herself quietly, "Do I really belong here? Or am I just convenient here to make life easier for them? Her thoughts wandered to her husband and to the little home they'd once shared, the dignity of having her own place, her own decisions, the warmth of being needed, not tolerated. The family was together, that was true. But in this new arrangement, what had become of family? Had it turned into a contract, an exchange of services for rent and meals? Was gratitude meant to disappear, lost in the bustle of workdays and after-school lessons? Evelyn looked around the busy suburban neighborhood, at the bright windows of other homes, wondering if she could find a place of her own, a space where she could be herself, greeting the sunrise with a cup of coffee, deciding on her own how to spend each day, being part of a family, yet being her own person too. These thoughts began to settle in her heart. For maybe the first time in her life, Evelyn Parker realized that, even without anyone's permission or gratitude, she could choose the life she wanted to live. There were questions Evelyn had never found the words for, yet they drifted for years in the quiet corners of her heart. Sometimes, on those gray afternoons in Connecticut, she'd pause in the middle of folding a towel or peeling a carrot, a silent wondering pressing gently and steadily upward. The doubt never spoke itself aloud. But over time, it grew calmly, inexorably. It was on one crisp evening in February 2024, cold as only New England can be near sundown, that Evelyn's silent question was given a voice, though not her own. She had just finished getting supper started, her daughter Susan's favorite pot, roast and mashed potatoes, and was carrying her recipe notes back to the little room that passed for her own. Just as she crossed the living room, a low, familiar voice caught her ear. "Yeah, she's still here. My mother-in-law. Honestly, our utility bills have gone up by like $220 a month since she moved in, and it's kind of making things tough for us." Evelyn stopped dead. That was Michael, her son-in-law, on the phone, his voice pitched quiet. Almost secretive, but not quiet enough. He must have thought she was out of earshot. Or maybe he assumed she'd learned to tune them out. But his words landed squarely, heavy as a shovel full of winter snow. For a long breath, Evelyn simply stood in the dim hallway, motionless, as though rooted to the clean patch of hardwood floor under her feet. She felt the cold nipping through her socks and into her bones, but what pressed even heavier was a sinking inside. She gripped a corner of her folded apron, suddenly unsure of her own right to be there. So that's how it is, she thought. I'm not family, not the person who raised their daughter or played tag in the backyard with their kids. I'm just the one driving up the bills, a cost of living tucked away in the ledger. Evelyn didn't say a word. She padded softly the rest of the way to her makeshift bedroom, her heart thudding dully. That evening, after the quietest of dinners, she sat down on the edge of her bed and slid open the old wooden drawer in the nightstand. From the back, she pulled out the battered blue bankbook she'd kept for decades. The savings inside had been gathered over a lifetime, every birthday card she'd never spent, every little tip from working holidays behind the church bazaar, bake sale table, every dollar carefully stretched. While the family took vacations she never joined, while holiday bonuses went untouched. 14 years as a widow, all the while saving for emergencies and, maybe, a little dignity. The balance glimmered at the bottom of the page, just over $28,000. For so long, she'd thought of this money as her hope, a cushion for sudden medical needs, or the worst of days. But as she thumbed through the faded deposit lines, it now felt less like a parachute, and more like a barely adequate ticket. Just enough to buy her right to stay under her daughter's roof. How much does it really take to keep a place in your own family, she wondered that night. Morning came with its usual rhythm. After breakfast dishes were tidied away, Evelyn folded her hands and took a steadying breath. In the kitchen, sunlight fell weakly onto the checkered floor as Susan scrolled on her phone and poured herself coffee. "Hey, Susan," Evelyn began softly. "I've been thinking, maybe I should start chipping in for the bills. For, living expenses." She spoke slowly, careful and gentle. Susan didn't look up. "Yeah, that would help," Susan replied, her tone flat. "If you're planning to stay for a while, pitching in about $350 a month would really even things out. That's fair, isn't it? We've got our own expenses, you know." For a heartbeat, everything in the sunshine-washed kitchen felt suspended. It wasn't about the money, the 350, the groceries, the power, or the heat. It was the way Susan said it, matter of fact, not a hint of warmth. The hard, unblinking look in her eyes, the chill in her voice. As Evelyn closed her eyes, she could almost imagine signing a lease instead of speaking to her only daughter. It felt, for a moment, as if Susan was asking her to pay admission to prove her right to stay. Worse still, what broke Evelyn's heart most was that the words came from the grown girl she had once cradled, soothed after nightmares, and sent off to school on long-ago autumn mornings. Still, Evelyn managed a small, sturdy smile. She nodded, as if unfazed. "All right," she replied quietly. "If that makes life easier for you." Inside, though, she felt something fracture small and silent, but sure. That night, she lay awake in bed, watching shadows slide across the ceiling as headlights passed on the street. Outside the ranch house, she found herself whispering the question she'd carried for so many months. Where am I now? Is this really my home? Do I still belong here? The word family, which she built her whole life around for decades, with dinners, laughter, and care, suddenly felt as fragile as the bankbook in her hands, as if it too could be spent away. A month passed, silent with unasked questions and careful smiles. On March 10, 2024, Evelyn woke early. She dressed with care, each button and fold precise, as if for a special appointment. She walked out into the chill of the morning with her overcoat zipped tight, stopping by the Branch Bank's ATM at the edge of the plaza, its green awning just starting to glow in the first light. She slipped the faded bankbook through the slot, transferred 350 as agreed, and stood a moment, feeling nothing and everything. She had paid the living expenses, the fee to keep her place, the price of her pride. As she returned home, hands deep in her coat pockets, Evelyn wondered where the line was between sharing a roof and simply renting a room. And deep inside, the quiet resolve began, not to expect gratitude, but to find, at long last, a place to live on her own terms. On the line for the transfer, the account name showed her son-in-law's name. For the memo, all it said was, "Living expenses." Walking back to the house in the March wind, Evelyn could already hear the familiar clatter and sense of dinner time. Drifting from the kitchen, Susan's steady rhythm at the sink, the ticking of the microwave, the hum of American suburbia in early spring. It was all perfectly normal, as if nothing in their quiet world had shifted at all. Evelyn tucked the envelope with her bank receipt into her purse, quietly, her movements deliberate, careful not to crinkle the paper. A new habit, this hiding away of small evidence. She set her coat in the hall and stepped into the kitchen, her presence unannounced. But not unwelcome either. That night, they gathered around the dining table for dinner in their split-levels cozy nook. The kind of meal they'd had 100 times. Rotisserie chicken on a blue dish, peas from a freezer bag, instant potatoes in a steaming heap. Halfway through the meal, Emma, her granddaughter, twirled her fork lazily and asked casually, without any malice, as children so often do, "Hey, Mom, does Grandma pay money here too?" Susan didn't pause, didn't look up. She answered between mouthfuls, practical and plain. "Yeah, she does, honey. She lives here, just like the rest of us. The electric bill's higher, the water too, so we all help out. That's just how things are." Evelyn met no one's eyes. She only laid her utensils down, lifted her mug, and sipped her tea. A simple act. Almost ritual, the words stinging quietly in her chest. Much later, when dishes were done and everyone had retreated to their screens or homework, Evelyn took a small detour to the fridge. From the back, the spot where things too precious or too old get forgotten, she pulled out a little Mont Blanc cake. Once, years ago, Susan had declared it her absolute favorite on birthday after. Birthday, vanilla and pecan, billows of chestnut cream. These days, the newest cupcakes and trendy desserts lined the shelves at the D. Local bakery. Evelyn had to search the glass case just to find one tucked at the very back. Maybe tonight, she thought. Just for old time's sake, I'll put it out. She peeled the bakery paper away, placed the cake gently on a plate, and set it in the middle of the dining table. Nothing fancy, just a hopeful gesture, reaching out with memory's hand. But the hours circled round first, the click of the dishwasher, then the lonely hum of the house after dark. No one touched the cake. No one even mentioned it. The next morning, Emma was the first to spot the plate sitting untouched atop the breakfast table, the white cream just beginning to collapse. "Mom, is this cake expired or something?" she called. Susan shrugged as she poured cereal. "I guess it's just something Grandma picked that's been around a while." For a moment, Evelyn almost laughed, the urge bubbling up from somewhere deep and strange. But beneath her gentle smile, she felt her chest constrict, a subtle ache, heavier than words. So maybe, she thought, I'm not even someone to tiptoe around anymore. I'm just there, neither guest nor burden, simply invisible. That evening, alone in her room, Evelyn opened her bank statement again, her hands steady, her mind sharper than it had been in weeks. The numbers stared back. $28,000 saved. Give or take a little in interest. No grand fortune, but no trivial sum either. Her life since Richard's death had been narrow and neat. No cruises, no restaurant dinners with friends. Every small joy set aside. For my old age, for Susan and Emma, for college fund. Each deposit built from tiny sacrifices. Now, she began slipping bills from the safe pocket in her purse back into the envelope. She wasn't counting it out for utility bills or rent. No. This stack, she realized, was for taking herself back. Just after sunrise the next day, Evelyn pulled out her best coat and walked briskly to the neighborhood branch bank. Inside, she faced the teller squarely, met the woman's eyes, and said with certainty, "I'd like to withdraw the whole balance. Every dollar. Fees are fine, just cash please." The teller's eyes widened but said nothing, her hands moving automatically. Minutes later, a thick envelope heavier than any check she'd ever held tumbled into Evelyn's hands. In that silent moment, something within her ended quietly, not with bitterness, but with the gentle closing of one long door. This money, she realized, doesn't belong to anyone else now. From now on, I'll use it just for me. That evening, as the house settled into its usual nighttime hush, Evelyn slid her spare envelope from the bottom drawer, one she'd tucked away. Weeks before, a secret almost from herself. Slipped inside was a copy of the purchase agreement, her pre-lease on an independent living condominium for seniors in a quiet town upstate, signed and dated, first payment made. There it was in black and white, purchase price, $336,000, flyer, Evelyn Parker, move-in date, April 15, 2024, and, noted carefully, move-in terms include full discretion for visitation, resident may limit, or allow guests as desired. Soon, Evelyn would decide who entered her doorway, on her own terms. A new chapter entirely. On the morning of March 12, 2024, precisely at 10:00 a.m., Evelyn Parker walked quietly through the glass doors of Oakdale Realty, sunlight glinting off their brass handles just near the Main Street train stop. She stood tall, the envelope still warm in her hand. She was ready to live at last, and at long, long last for herself. Inside the real estate office, everything gleamed with tidy order. White walls were lined from corner to corner with neatly printed flyers. Condos for sale, apartments for rent, options for independent seniors. The place had a quiet, respectful hush. The kind of calm you might find at the library or a family-owned law firm on Main Street in any Midwestern town. A young man at the reception desk, clean-cut in a blue plaid shirt, looked up from his computer as Evelyn entered. He smiled, a little surprised but friendly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you looking for some help today? What would you like to see?" His voice was soft and tidy, owing maybe to the habit of serving older clients. Evelyn Parker didn't hesitate. She took a step forward, her back long straightened by years of holding back worries, and answered in a clear, measured tone. "Yes, thank you. I'm searching for a place to live alone. I don't plan to have visitors. I just want somewhere quiet, somewhere with good sunlight." And, she paused, just long enough to gather a bit of breath, It would be nice if there was a grocery store or maybe a park nearby. The young man's brows flicked upward, more out of curiosity than concern. So, you're not planning to move in with family? Evelyn offered a gentle smile. Not bitter, not apologetic. There was a kind of determination shining there, burnished by the long silence of years. A strength gathered up and saved for a moment, just like this. No, not this time, she said softly. I want to live somewhere of my own choosing. For myself. Not just to stay where I'm allowed under my family's roof, but in a place I have picked for myself, where I can finish out my own life as my own person. The young agent nodded, understanding more than his years might have promised. He reached for a stack of brochures, places with quiet neighborhoods, gentle sidewalks, and amenities made for seniors who still carried their own. Grocery bags and pride alike. Evelyn's finger paused over one listing in particular. It showed a small one-bedroom condo, just 7 minutes walk from the train station, a senior-friendly, independent living community. The listing said, south-facing windows, balcony, bright single room, safety features included. The clincher? It was a place where she wouldn't have to worry about getting in anyone's way. Something she knew in her bones was more precious than granite, countertops or vaulted ceilings. The process from there was smooth as a well-creased bedsheet. She'd already signed the pre-agreement, left a deposit, had the last details checked. All that remained was wiring the balance, just under $336,000. Her envelope of cash ready and accounted for, and picking her move-in date. After the paperwork settled, Evelyn slipped the close-in folder into her battered purse and lingered there, palms resting on the envelope. She stood still for a moment, letting the reality of it press against her, both heavy and light at once. Ever since that day I realized I was no longer needed by my own family. I've been getting ready, learning what it means to live on my own. Choosing a place at this age, for myself, is the last bit of independence I can claim. Not as someone else's housekeeper or just filling space, but as myself, on my own terms. 3 days later, morning light broke clear across the townhouses and sidewalks of Susan's Connecticut neighborhood. Evelyn had made up her mind. She was going to leave her daughter's house that day. She quietly packed her belongings, a couple changes of clothes, her bank documents, and, tucked at the bottom of her purse, one old, battered photo album she'd saved from her earliest days as a wife and mother. She took nothing more. No fuss, no announcement. No need for goodbyes that risked anyone arguing with her decision. That, in the end, was her last gift. A final act of gentleness. Not to trouble her daughter or grandchildren, not to require them to wrestle with guilt or last-minute goodbyes. Just quiet, respectful distance. Before she left, Evelyn laid a single envelope on the kitchen table, right where Susan was sure to find it over her morning coffee. On its front, in careful cursive, she wrote, "Thank you. Thank you for showing me that having a house and having a home to return to aren't always the same thing." Inside the envelope, the key to Susan's house, and the latest copy of the bank transfer slip. Her final payment of living expenses. It was proof Evelyn had bought her own freedom with her own hands. That her place in the world, small but dignified, was hers once more. Stepping out the front door, into the soft, fresh air of a Connecticut spring, she paused as a gentle wind moved across her face. There was coolness to it, enough to wake you up. But a sweetness, too, as if the wind itself whispered, "You did well." And just like that, Evelyn Parker felt lighter than she had in years. Now, she breathed, I can finally be myself again. Decades had passed, years spent as a wife, mother, grandmother, helpful in-law, always fitting herself to the shape of the family's needs. But this was a new chapter. In that bright morning, as the light slanted through the kitchen window and caught the cream envelope. On the table, Susan walked in and stopped, surprise catching in her voice. "Mom?" She didn't yet understand what had happened or how completely the winds had changed. But for Evelyn, stepping through the door and into her new life, the journey toward dignity and selfhood had, at last, truly begun. Looking around the house, Susan couldn't find a single trace of her mother, Evelyn Parker. Not in the kitchen, not on the back porch, not even in her usual corner of the sunroom. All was still, so quiet you could almost hear the refrigerator hum. Nothing to break the silence that had settled over the place. For as long as Susan could remember, her mother had always been up before dawn, standing in the kitchen with the kettle steaming, humming some tune from childhood. But now, that familiar presence had vanished, leaving the house oddly empty, as if something essential had gone out of the world. In the closet once packed tight with clothes, extra scarves, and the scent of lavender sachets, only a couple of simple dresses remained. On the highest shelf, tucked away with the care of someone who has packed and unpacked her life too. Many times sat a small, worn photo album. Susan, almost on impulse, reached for it. The cover gave a little as she opened it, revealing page after page of photographs she'd never seen before. Most were candid, taken from a distance, shots of Susan herself, awkward in a middle school band uniform, her own daughter Emma at a swim meet, her son James grinning through frosting at a messy birthday party. There were dozens of these, at school plays, graduations, soccer games, yet in none of them did her mother, Evelyn, appear. Instead, on every page, there were handwritten notes in tidy, careful script. Her mother's own writing, familiar from decades of birthday cards and grocery lists. March 9, Emma's first piano recital. Couldn't get a seat inside, so I watched from the hallway, catching glimpses through the door and listening when the applause got loud. April 23rd. Saw Susan and James walking home from school, backpacks bigger than their shoulders. I hope they grow to be strong enough for the world. May 12, sent 700 with a card for Susan's birthday cake. Wrote for something sweet to share, but never heard back. Susan's hands trembled as she turned each page. With every line, something in her chest twisted tighter. Mom was always watching us, always caring, even when I was too busy to see it. She thought, shame rising in her throat. Why did I never notice, never say thank you, never once even ask? Grabbing her phone, Susan dialed her mother's number, once, twice, over and over. The line rang and rang, no answer. Not even the familiar click of the voicemail that used to assure her, "This is Evelyn. Please leave a message." Desperate, she opened her messaging app. Words came in a rush, tumbling out with none of the caution she'd always used in conversation. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please, if you need anything, just ask. Don't be mad at me." She sent the message, then stared at the screen, waiting for that little check mark to flash, anything to let her know her mother had read it. Minutes passed. Nothing. Far across town, in a quiet neighborhood just beyond the commuter train line, Evelyn Parker was beginning a new chapter of her life in a modest senior apartment complex. 5 minutes walk from the station, the place was set back from the main street by cherry trees and the soft hush of a residential court. With her own keys jingling in her pocket, Evelyn woke early with the dawn, stretched in the square of sunlight by her bedroom window, and set out for a walk to the small city park round the corner. She stopped at the bakery on the way home, picked up a cranberry scone and a little tub of English tea, and carried everything upstairs to be enjoyed on her sunny balcony. By 10 o'clock, she was ready for calligraphy class down at the community center, a little ritual she'd signed up for almost as soon as she moved in. Later in the day, the local women's club met in the lounge for coffee and craft projects. Evelyn found herself rolling dough for biscuits and showing a friendly neighbor how to fold paper cranes for her grandchildren. In those moments, for the first time in years, Evelyn felt truly visible. Not just useful or convenient, but recognized, appreciated, part of something she chose. "Your handwriting's beautiful, Mrs. Parker. It makes me calm just watching," someone told her in class, scribbling her name on the place card. Or, "These cookies taste just like something you'd buy in a real bakery. You have to show me the recipe," another neighbor said, biting into a homemade treat. Simple words, small gestures, but each one let warmth seep back into Evelyn's heart, a gentle reminder that presence could be acknowledged, that giving and receiving could be balanced. She realized, slowly, that her role in the world didn't have to be defined by others' expectations. Or the needs of family. She could be happy, really happy, just for herself, just being herself. I don't need to live only for someone else, or to prove my worth in invisible ways. It's all right to laugh for my own sake, she thought. Smiling into her teacup at dusk, the windows glowing gold around her. That evening, she set the kettle to boil and sat, alone, but not lonely, in her new kitchen. When her phone chimed messages from Susan popping one by one onto the screen, she read them in silence. Hi, Mom. Are you doing okay? Is it lonely out there? Are you eating well? Emma says she wants to see you. She misses Grandma. Evelyn read each message, set her phone face down on the table, and let the night grow still again. She didn't reply. It wasn't anger holding her back, and it wasn't bitterness either. Evelyn simply knew. She was finished living with her heart wide open, waiting to be understood. She had chosen a quieter path, one with gentler boundaries, a way of being where she no longer risked being hurt for hoping too much. If you stop expecting, you stop being wounded. If you stop reaching, you stop being turned away. This wasn't defiance, it was a form of quiet self-protection, as gentle as closing a door in the evening, as fundamental as locking your house for the night. Late that night, she stepped onto her balcony, the spring air cool on her cheeks. High above the suburbs' glow, the moon watched quietly, unchanged. Evelyn whispered a few soft words into the darkness, words meant for no one but herself, and for the gentle possibility that tomorrow, too, could be simply, serenely, her own. Thank you. I'll be all right now. It was April 2024, the first warm days after a stubborn New England winter. At the local community center, a meeting had been called, a conversation on self-worth in our senior years. The event drew folks from all walks, retirees with worn gardening gloves, silver-haired grandmothers in cardigans, sons and daughters curious, hesitant, and neighbors who'd come to listen, because for some unspoken reason they felt compelled. On that particular afternoon, Evelyn Parker stood up small of frame, neat as a pin in a well-pressed blouse, her hands trembling just enough to give herself away. She was a little nervous, and her face showed it, but her eyes, clear, steady, blue as cornflowers, were filled with a quiet resolve. She had something to say, and she meant for it to reach every soul in the room. She took the microphone, glanced slowly at her audience, taking in the rows of attentive faces. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice sure and gentle. I'm 74 years old. Not long ago, I moved in with my daughter and her family out in the Connecticut suburbs. For months I believed I was living together with them, or at least, I wanted to believe. That's what it was. There was a subtle shift in the air, an undercurrent of anticipation running through the folding chairs and coffee cups scattered around the hall. For as long as I can remember, I thought that being a mother meant only one thing, always giving. Giving love, giving time, giving every penny when I had it. Mothers do, because it's what mothers do. Never once did I question that line. I filled lunchboxes and handed out advice, and sometimes my own hopes, without a second thought. She paused, the words catching in her throat. Evelyn closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and spoke again, her voice calm. But then, one quiet morning, a question crossed my mind. I had never let myself ask. When did my existence start coming with a price tag? A ripple moved through the room, equal parts discomfort, empathy, and curiosity. She continued, looking directly at each face, one by one. If, just to live with my family, I'm required to pay, say, $350 every month, well, that's not family anymore. That's a contract. And the moment it became a dollar figure, little by little, but surely something inside me began to fade away. My worth as a mother, as a person, it started to disappear. Silence echoed. It wasn't an awkward, empty silence, but a listening one, a waiting, breath-held hush. But Evelyn was ready for that hush. She gathered herself for her last words. I'd rather spend my money on buying my own freedom than pay for someone else's. Permission to exist. That's the last bit of pride I'm holding on to. For a moment, no one moved. Then, in the corner of the room, someone began to clap, quietly. Then another. The applause grew, wave after wave, until it filled every corner with something like understanding. A few days later, on a pastel afternoon just touched with the smell of thawing earth, Evelyn's doorbell rang in her new apartment. She opened the door. On the step stood her daughter, Susan, and Susan's daughter, Emma. There was no fanfare, no speeches or excuses. Susan only bowed her head silently. In her hand, she clutched a small paper bag, soft from being held tightly. "These are those sweet pastries you used to like." Emma picked them out. "If it's all right. Could we maybe just sit for a bit? Maybe have some tea?" Evelyn did not answer right away. She simply unlocked the door and opened it a couple inches wider, her face softening. "There's a chair here in the entryway. If that works, you're welcome to use it." Uh. Susan nodded, swallowing back tears. The two women sat, awkwardly arranged in the foyer, but neither minded. Words were scarce. The silence hung between them, tentative, tremulous. But inside it, something real was starting to grow again. As Emma untied the waxed paper wrapping from the cookies, she looked up, wide-eyed and earnest. "Grandma, will you come to my field day next year?" For the first time in many moons, Evelyn laughed, a gentle, wrinkled-up smile that creased her eyes. "That sounds good," she replied. "Maybe this time, I'll actually sit with everyone else, instead of watching through the window." To you, dear listener, I offer a gentle question from my heart to yours. Are you measuring the goodness of family only in dollars and cents? Sometimes, what a mother truly wants is not the cold sum of $350, but a warm, everyday invitation. "Come, sit here with us at supper." Remember, love's value can't be written in a checkbook. Sometimes, it's just a seat at the table and the comfort of being welcome when you walk through the door. Is there someone important to you, right now, at this very moment, whom you haven't spoken to in far too long? If a name or a face springs quietly to mind, maybe a friend, a neighbor, or an old family member, don't let the moment slip away. Try reaching out to them. Tell them, simply and honestly, thank you. Sometimes those two small words can mean more than you ever imagined. Thank you for listening, truly, all the way to the end of this story. If even the smallest piece of this tale lingers in your heart, I hope you'll let others know, maybe with a like, maybe with a comment, or maybe by sharing this with someone who might need it too. And the next time we meet, I'll have another story for you, one that sits close beside the invisible tears carried by someone out there in the world tonight, because sometimes just having another person quietly at your side is the greatest comfort in this life. Not grand gestures or sweeping words, but a simple presence that whispers, "You are not alone." May the wish in your heart, that longing to be cherished, just as you are, reach those who need it and return to you as well. Thank you again for being here. Until next time, may you find warmth and kindness and offer it to someone in turn.